logistical aid to weaken the government of President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, with a view to pressure him to be more conciliatory and open to negotiations with Israel. One faction receiving covert U.S. political and financial support through the Saudis was the exiled Syrian Muslim Brotherhood. According to former French Foreign Minister Roland Abbas, Britain had planned covert action against Syria as early as 2009. Get that, 4 years ago. I was in England 2 years before the violence in Syria on other business, he told French television. I met with top British officials who confessed to me that they were preparing something in Syria. This was in Britain, not in America. Now, Britain was preparing gunmen to invade the country of Syria as early as 4 years ago. Well, 2 years ago, the 2011 uprisings, it would seem, triggered by a confluence of domestic energy shortages and climate-induced droughts, which led to massive food price hikes, came at an opportune moment that was quickly exploited. Leaked emails from the private intelligence firm Stratfor, including notes from a meeting with Pentagon officials, confirmed U.S. and U.K. training of Syrian opposition forces since 2011, aimed at eliciting the collapse of Assad's regime from within. So, what was this unfolding strategy to determine Syria and Iran all about? According to retired NATO Secretary General Wesley Clark, a memo from the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense just a few weeks after 9/11 revealed plans to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, moving on to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran, all of which are hotbed sources. Guess what? Oil. Yeah, absolutely. In a subsequent interview, Clark argues that this strategy is fundamentally about control of the region's vast oil and gas resources. Much of the strategy currently at play was candidly described in a 2008 U.S. Army-funded RAND report, Unfolding the Future of the Long War. The report noted that the economies of the industrialized states will continue to rely heavily on oil, thus making it a strategically important resource. As most oil will be produced in the Middle East, the United States has motive for maintaining stability in and good relations with Middle Eastern states. The geographic area of proven oil reserves coincides with the power base of much of the Salafi jihadist network. This creates a linkage between oil supplies and the long war that is not easily broken or simply characterized. Now, for the foreseeable future, world oil production growth and total output will be dominated by Persian Gulf resources. The region, therefore, will remain a strategic priority, and this priority will interact strongly with that of prosecuting the long war. In this context, the report identified several potential trajectories for regional policy focused on protecting access to Gulf oil supplies, among which the following are most salient. Divide and rule focuses on exploiting fault lines between the various jihadist groups to turn them against each other and dissipate their energy on internal conflicts. This strategy relies heavily on covert action, information operations, unconventional warfare, and support to indigenous security forces. The United States and its local allies could use the nationalist jihadists to launch proxy IO campaigns to discredit the transnational jihadists in the eyes of the local populace. U.S. leaders could also choose to capitalize on the sustained Shia-Sunni conflict trajectory by taking the side of the conservative Sunni regimes against Shia empowerment movements in the Muslim world, possibly supporting authoritative Sunni governments against a continually hostile Iran. Now, bear with me, there's still a little bit more here. Exploring different scenarios for this trajectory, the report speculated that the United States may concentrate on shoring up the traditional Sunni regimes in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan as a way of containing Iranian power and influence in the Middle East and Persian Gulf. noting that this could actually empower al-Qaeda jihadists. The report concluded that doing so might work in Western interest by bogging down jihadi activity with internal sectarian rivalry rather than targeting the United States. Now, one of the oddities of this long war trajectory is that it may actually reduce the al-Qaeda threat to U.S. interest in the short term. The upsurge in Shia identity and confidence seen here would certainly cause serious concern in the Salafi jihadist community in the Muslim world, including the senior leadership of al-Qaeda. Now, putting all this together, what I see happening here is, as a result, it is very likely that al-Qaeda might focus its efforts on targeting Iranian interests throughout the Middle East and Persian Gulf, while simultaneously cutting back on anti-American and anti-Western opportunities. The RAND document contextualized this distributing strategy with surprisingly persistent recognition of the increasing vulnerability of the United States' key allies and enemies: Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Egypt, Syria, Iran, to a range of converging crises, ranging rising populations, a youth bulge, internal economic inequalities, political frustrations, sectarian tensions, and environmentally linked water shortages, all of which could destabilize these countries from within or exacerbate interstate conflicts. The report noted especially that Syria is among several downstream countries that are becoming increasingly water scarce as their populations grow, increasing the risk of conflict. Thus, although the RAND document fell far short of recognizing the prospect of an Arab Spring, it illustrates that 3 years before the 2011 uprisings, the United States officials were alive to the region's growing instabilities and concerned by the potential consequences for stability of Gulf oil. These strategic concerns, motivated by fear of expanding Iranian influence, impacted Syria primarily in relation to pipeline geopolitics. Now, taking us back 4 years ago, the same year, former French Foreign Minister Damas alleges the British began planning operations in Syria. Assad refused to sign a proposed agreement with Qatar that would run a pipeline from the latter's North Field contiguous with Iran's South Pars Field through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and on to Turkey, with a view to supply European markets, albeit crucially bypassing Russia. Assad's rationale was to protect the interest of his Russian ally, which is Europe's top supplier of natural gas. Instead, the following year, Assad pursued negotiations for an alternative $10 billion pipeline plan with Iran across Iraq to Syria that would also potentially allow Iran to supply gas to Europe from its South Pars Field shared with Qatar. The Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, for the project was signed in July 2012, just as Syria's civil war was spreading to Damascus and Aleppo, and earlier this year, Iraq signed a framework agreement for construction of gas pipelines. The Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline plan was a direct slap in the face to Qatar's plan. No wonder Saudi Prince Bandar bin Sultan, in a failed attempt to bribe Russia to switch sides, told Russian President Vladimir Putin that whatever regime comes after Assad, it will be completely in Saudi Arabia's hands and will not sign any agreement allowing any Gulf country to transport its gas across Syria to Europe and compete with Russian exports. According to diplomatic sources, when Putin refused, the prince vowed military action. It would seem that contradictory, self-serving Saudi and Qatari oil interests are putting the strings of an equally self-serving oil-focused U.S. policy in Syria, if not the wider region. This is the problem of establishing a pliable opposition to the United States and its oil allies. Feel confident they'll play ball pipeline style in a post-Assad Syria. That will determine the nature of any prospective intervention, not concern for Syrian life. What is beyond doubt is that Assad is a war criminal whose government deserves to be overthrown. The question is, by whom and for what interest? So that is why I believe we should not go to war in Syria. That's why we should not attack, because I question the motives. And I think it's more about securing those oil fields for the United States and our allies than it is about saving the Syrian people. Because the timing is just too convenient. You know, thousands of people have been hurt all along, but suddenly a bunch of civilians are hurt. I'm not saying their lives should be exonerated. They shouldn't be, redeemed through some sort of retaliatory measure. But why now? Why are these few thousand more important than the hundreds of other thousands who have died and the United States didn't give two shits in the wind about? Okay. So, that's all I'm going to say about Syria at this point, okay? I know that's quite a mouthful and a lot to digest, but that's where I stand with it at this particular point. Well, what do you say we step aside for a little bit and take care of a little bit of the business here at hand, plus to give my choppers a little bit of a break, because, reading that article, I got that from Alternet, by the way. Those were not entirely all my thoughts, but that pretty much summarizes how I feel about the situation in Syria. Well, anyway, on a lighter note, at the start of the program, you probably heard this. Listen real closely. Believe it or not, that is a dog. It's an Akita. Sounds like he says, I don't know. Anyway, I found that on the internet a few weeks ago before I started producing this show, and it made me think of my mom's old Akita. Some of my friends at work think that when I'm making those monkey sounds, this is what I was originally trying to imitate, this kind of sound. But I don't have quite the guttural sound to do this. But anyway, that is an Akita, and I have more Akita sounds in the system. Well, as I said, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a look at things you need to know for this Tuesday. You, my friend, are listening to First Cup, and today is Tuesday, September 23rd, 2013.
Hi, I'm Bev Randalls, chairman of the Missouri Club for Growth. If you're like most people, you've had enough of wasted tax dollars and inefficient government. It's no surprise independent polling consistently finds that Americans believe at least half of our federal tax dollars are wasted every year. Here in Missouri, our state legislature is working to cut waste and grow our economy by passing the first major tax reform in nearly 100 years. This tax reform will benefit all Missourians by creating new jobs and letting us keep more of our hard-earned money to spend as we see fit. Put simply, tax reform means economic growth, and growth means more money and more opportunities for more Missouri families. If you agree, we need your help. Visit growmissouri.com today to tell our elected officials, stop wasting our tax dollars and start focusing on jobs and the economy. That's growmissouri.com.
Paid for by Missouri Club for Growth PAC.
Have you witnessed anything like this?
Mate, I've told you before, this is for real women.
Is there a problem here?
No matter how subtle,
So who is it this week, a guy or a girl? Haven't you made your mind up yet?
they are all forms of sexually based harassment.
Sarah, get that thing off your neck. We don't all need to hear about it.
Anybody can report this behaviour.
And there are laws to protect you.
Do something about it.
Welcome back to Studio 26, and you know what this show needs? Is an old man. I guess the closest we're going to get is this. Yeah, that's right.
Really?
Yeah, that's really.
This one is unflippin' believable.
Well, you got that right, Governor.